The evening air was still, the sky tinged with fading gold as Amelia Grant steered her car down a long, empty stretch of road. She had just left a top-secret briefing, one of the many that came with her new role as director of the FBI. Though used to the weight of national security resting on her shoulders, tonight she longed for something far simpler: silence, the hum of tires on asphalt, and the thought of home. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, her posture relaxed but attentive. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't veered. Her signal use was textbook. For someone who had spent her career enforcing the law, Amelia knew she was following it. And yet, without warning, the sudden flash of red and blue lights filled her mirrors. Before we continue, we'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us get closer to 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us. Thank you so much. She didn't panic. She never panicked. But something in her gut stirred. Slowly, deliberately, she guided her car to the shoulder and parked, taking a steady breath as she kept both hands on the wheel. Her training taught her control, but her instincts whispered caution. Through the mirror, she caught her first glimpse of the approaching officer. His steps were heavy, his shoulders squared. But it was his body language, rigid, almost aggressive, that raised her internal alarms. His left hand hovered too close to his weapon, and the flashlight beam cut straight through her windshield, blinding and unnecessary. She rolled down her window only partway, her voice calm and clear. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" There was no reply. No explanation. Just a curt demand. License and registration. Not even a greeting. Not even a pretense of courtesy. Amelia's breath remained slow, steady. She had read countless reports of traffic stops gone wrong. She had reviewed the footage. She had authorized investigations. But she never imagined that one day she would be the subject of such a report. And so, on an unremarkable stretch of highway, what began as an ordinary evening would unravel into a confrontation that would test not just her patience, but the very soul of the system she had sworn to serve. The officer moved closer, his silhouette now visible in her side mirror, broad-shouldered, tense and strangely silent. There was no greeting, no explanation for the stop. Just a stiff presence and a gaze that didn't seek understanding but rather control. His left hand hovered near his holstered weapon, not in caution, but as if ready to escalate without cause. Amelia noticed the tightness in his jaw, the absence of any badge number clearly displayed, and the way he wielded his flashlight, not to inspect but to intimidate, shining it directly into her eyes as though she were already guilty of something unnamed. Still, she remained composed. With a steady hand, she reached across to the passenger seat, moving deliberately, narrating every action to avoid misinterpretation. "Sir, I'm reaching for my license and identification," she said clearly. No response. Not a word. From her wallet, she pulled not just her driver's license, but also her federal credentials, an unmistakable badge identifying her as the director of the FBI. She held them out respectfully, her fingers motionless, her eyes steady. The officer glanced at them, but his expression didn't change. No acknowledgement. No recognition. Only a cold, unreadable stare that lingered on her face longer than it should have. It wasn't curiosity, it was scrutiny, laced with something darker. A silent judgment. Amelia had seen that look before in courtroom photos, in archived videos from misconduct cases, in the testimonies of citizens who hadn't lived to speak again. It was a look that didn't ask questions because it had already formed its answers. At that moment, a quiet warning rang through her mind, not from fear, but from the deep well of experience. Something was wrong. And she knew, with the clarity of someone who had studied these moments for decades, that this wasn't about a traffic violation. This was about power, and the unsettling ways it could be misused in silence. Despite having clearly presented her identification, both her driver's license and her official FBI credentials, the officer showed no sign of backing down. His silence was not from uncertainty, but from something far more calculated. Without so much as a word of explanation, he took a step back and barked in order. "Step out of the vehicle." Amelia's hands remained calmly on the steering wheel, her voice measured and respectful. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being asked to exit my vehicle?" No answer. Instead, she watched as he reached for the door handle firmly, without hesitation. The motion was aggressive, and the message unmistakable. This wasn't a request. This was a power play. His fingers gripped the handle as if prepared to drag her out, regardless of who she was or what the law permitted. At that moment, Amelia knew with chilling clarity, this was no longer a routine stop. This was no longer about protocol. It was about dominance. It was about a man in uniform who saw not a federal official behind the wheel, but a woman he believed he could control, someone he assumed would not, or could not, resist. But he was wrong, and the moment was shifting. Not toward compliance, but toward confrontation, unwanted, unjust, and dangerously close. With a firm yet composed voice, Amelia warned the officer, "You're out of protocol, officer. This is not how lawful stops are conducted." Her words were not spoken in fear, but with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades upholding the very laws now being twisted before her eyes. But her warning was dismissed. His grip on the door handle tightened, his posture unyielding. He wasn't interested in procedure, he was interested in power. And as far as he was concerned, her credentials and calm defiance only added fuel to his aggression. Then came the sound of a second patrol car pulling up behind them, its headlights washing over the scene like a harsh spotlight. For a fleeting moment, Amelia allowed herself a breath of relief. A second officer, a new witness, perhaps this would bring balance to the situation. But that hope was quickly dashed. The second officer approached not with concern or curiosity, but with the same rehearsed hostility. No badge number was visible, no greeting offered. "We've got a non-compliant woman here," he muttered to his partner, loud enough for her to hear but spoken like she wasn't standing right there. Not director. Not mom. Just a problem to be subdued. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Non-compliant. Amelia knew all too well what that label could mean. In far too many reports, it was a phrase used to justify force, to erase truth, to write a narrative before it could be questioned. And now, that phrase had been stamped on her. Two armed men. One woman alone in her car. No backup. No protection. Just her voice, her restraint, and the clarity that this was no longer just about her. This was about a system. And about how far it would go when it thought no one was watching. Without any provocation, the first officer lunged toward the vehicle and grabbed Amelia's wrist too fast, too forcefully, without a shred of justification. The cold grip on her skin was more than physical, it was symbolic. It wasn't about control. It was about dominance, about making her feel small, powerless, erased. And though the instinct to defend herself surged through her like electricity, Amelia remained poised. She pulled her arm back, not in resistance, but in protection, knowing well that any misstep on her part could be rewritten into something it was not. Then came the second officer's voice over the radio, flat and devoid of truth. "We have a non-compliant suspect. Not a citizen. Not the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Not even a woman. Just a label. A justification. A dangerous distortion." Amelia knew those words too well. She had seen them in reports, heard them in courtrooms, read them in case files where victims were no longer alive to speak for themselves. And then, as if following a script written by arrogance and fear, the first officer reached for his gun. Without warning or escalation, he drew his weapon and pointed it deliberately, menacingly, directly at her face. The barrel of the gun hovered just inches from her skin, close enough for her to feel its chill, close enough to hear the silence that followed. For a moment, the world stopped. No wind, no movement, no breath, just the sound of injustice thick in the air. But Amelia didn't flinch. Her heart remained steady. Her hands did not tremble. What she felt was not panic, it was a quiet, measured awareness of the truth, that this was no longer about a routine stop, or even a rogue officer. This was about a broken system, one that gave certain men the illusion of unchecked authority, and taught them they could aim a gun at a woman like her and walk away unchallenged. Still, she said nothing. She met his eyes not with defiance, but with something far more powerful, dignity. Then, from the edge of the darkness, a voice pierced the silence. "I'm recording this." A man standing on the roadside with a phone held high, illuminated by the glow of his screen, had seen everything. His voice, though calm, cut through the tension like a blade. He didn't need to shout. His presence alone shifted the balance. The officer with the gun hesitated. His partner shifted uneasily, suddenly aware that control had slipped through their fingers. For the first time since the stop began, they were not the only ones writing the narrative. And in that fragile moment, Amelia Grant sat still, unshaken, because she understood better than anyone. Sometimes justice does not arrive with sirens and gavels. Sometimes it begins when someone dares to witness. Then, in that unbearable stillness, a single figure stepped forward from the crowd, an ordinary Joseph drawn by the harsh crack of authority gone awry. He raised his phone, its screen casting a pale glow on determined features, and spoke with unwavering clarity. "I'm recording this." The words echoed down the deserted stretch of road like a verdict rendered aloud. Time seemed to warp as every head turned toward him. The officers' rigid postures faltered. The first officer's finger twitched on the trigger, the second's radio hand stilled in mid-reach. They were caught in a beam of truth they could neither deny nor erase. Around them, other witnesses raised their own devices, each click of a camera shutter punctuating the wrongness of the moment. A hush fell, broken only by the soft hum of phones and the witnesses' steady breathing. No one spoke, no one dared lower their gaze. The president's daughter of the FBI, trapped in a nightmare of abuse, found her burden lightened by this chorus of solidarity. In that shared silence, the officer's power unraveled, no longer backed by loneliness or fear, but exposed to the bright glare of public witness. Emboldened, the onlooker advanced another step, hand still raised. "Everything you do is being captured," he reminded them, voice gentle but resolute. "You can't unsee this." The words carried more weight than any order could. They were the weight of 100 unseen eyes, of accountability incarnate. The first officer's grip on his weapon slackened. His partner, once so sure of his backing, glanced around in nervous confusion. The arrogance that had fueled their brutality retreated before the undeniable proof of their own misconduct. The witness didn't lower his phone until both officers finally let the weapon fall. Even then, his gaze never wavered. In that moment, the Joseph became the catalyst for a larger truth, that courage need not wear a uniform. It could bloom from the simplest act, a single phone held aloft, a voice refusing to be silent. And as sirens wailed in the distance, answering the call for help, the crowd exhaled as one. The power of collective witness had turned the tide, reminding every person present and every viewer yet to come that justice often begins when someone dares to see and record the truth. Within minutes, a fleet of patrol cars thundered onto the shoulder, their lights painting the still night scene in urgent red and blue. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, only to freeze when a tall, authoritative figure in a starched uniform pushed through the crowd. He was a senior command officer, one whose keen eye swept the tableau like a veteran judge. His gaze fell first on Amelia Grant, standing composed amid the chaos. Recognition dawned instantly. This was no ordinary motorist, but the very director of the FBI. The realization rippled through the ranks, shifting the atmosphere from confrontation to contrition. The senior officer barked sharp commands. "Lower your weapon," he ordered the first policeman, his voice ironclad. As the barrel dropped, another officer stepped forward and snapped cuffs onto the stunned man's wrists. He was placed under arrest on the spot for brandishing a firearm without cause and abusing his authority. The second officer, still standing nearby, was handcuffed moments later and informed that he was suspended pending a formal inquiry. In the sudden calm that followed, Amelia felt the tension drain away. She offered no triumph, only the quiet steadiness of someone who had endured. Around her, onlookers released a collective breath, the nightmare of injustice giving way to the quick justice of recognition and accountability. As the senior officer guided Amelia to safety, he spoke with respectful urgency. "Director Grant, I apologize on behalf of my department. You have my personal assurance that every policy will be reviewed, every officer held responsible." In that dramatic reversal, the roadblock transformed into a turning point, proof that when truth is revealed and rank is recognized, power can be reclaimed by justice. By first light, the footage had gone viral, flooding every news cycle and social feed with scenes of a justice director threatened at gunpoint by those sworn to protect her. Public outcry was immediate and thunderous. Protest hashtags trended, opinion columns roared, and calls for accountability echoed from town halls to cable panels. Within hours, the Department of Justice issued an official statement pledging a thorough, expedited criminal inquiry into the officer's conduct. Investigators descended on the precinct to secure all evidence: body cam recordings, the Joseph's video, radio dispatch logs, and dash cam feeds. Witnesses were interviewed at once, including the motorist who had first recorded the encounter and the backup officers who arrived on scene. By midday, federal prosecutors obtained arrest warrants. The lead officer, facing charges of assault with a deadly weapon, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and official misconduct, was taken into custody. His partner, charged with failure to intervene and obstruction of justice, followed soon after. Within the courthouse steps, Department of Justice officials emphasized the message: no badge grants immunity from the law. Community leaders joined the chorus, hailing the rapid response as a turning point for policing culture. Across the country, law enforcement agencies braced for similar inquiries, recognizing that the era of unchecked authority had ended. That evening, as the two officers appeared in federal court, the judge set high bail and a swift trial schedule, underscoring the gravity of their alleged abuses. Media cameras captured every moment, ensuring the proceedings could not be quietly buried. In just 24 hours, what began as a routine traffic stop had transformed into a landmark assertion of constitutional protections, proof that when power is wielded unjustly, the law can strike back just as quickly. Standing before a sea of cameras and microphones on the courthouse steps, she raised no weapon, only her voice, steady and unwavering. What happened to me was not an isolated incident, she began, the late afternoon sun catching the emblem on her jacket. It speaks to a system that, far too often, tolerates abuse of authority and silence in the face of injustice. Her gaze swept over the crowd of reporters, advocates, and citizens who had gathered in solidarity. I wear this badge not for privilege but for accountability. Yet tonight I stand here having been threatened by those sworn to protect me, she continued, her precise diction underscoring each word's weight. If we allow these abuses to go unchallenged, we empower them to happen again against any one of us, regardless of rank or color. She paused, letting the moment settle. Then, with quiet passion, she issued her call to action. We must reform how we train, supervise, and hold accountable every law enforcement officer in this nation. Transparency, oversight, and community partnership cannot be mere slogans, they must be guiding principles. Turning to face the cameras at close range, she leaned forward slightly. And to those watching at home, your voice matters. Do not remain silent when you witness wrongdoing. Speak up, record, demand answers, and support those who seek justice. Only through collective courage can we ensure that power serves the people and never the other way around. With that, she stepped back, leaving behind a charged hush that rippled through the assembled crowd. Her words, part indictment and part inspiration, echoed long after she departed, marking the beginning of a movement to remake a system in which no one, no matter how powerful, could stand above the law. In the weeks that followed, police departments across the state adopted stricter use of force guidelines, mandatory body camera activation, and independent review boards. Lawmakers introduced bills to strengthen civilian oversight and protect whistleblowers. Her courageous stand became a rallying cry. Training academies added de-escalation and bias awareness modules. Community policing initiatives received greater funding. She, once the hunted, now stood as a symbol of integrity. Her name inspired town hall meetings, university seminars, and social media campaigns. Women and people of color saw in her a reflection of their own potential to challenge injustice. Millions shared her story not as a mere incident, but as proof that one person's resolve can spark systemic change. That legacy endures in every policy rewritten, every officer held accountable, and every citizen empowered to say, "I will not be silent." This story shows us the power of speaking up and documenting proof. The message is that anyone can become a witness and a defender of justice, even through a small act. What about you? How do you feel after hearing this story? Share your personal viewpoint below and join the discussion. When do you think racial bias in law enforcement will truly end? Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.